step behind the lens, and look beyond the boundaries of ordinary storytelling. Join us as we explore the defining moments in history, capturing the exact seconds that changed our world forever.
Officer, I'm a cardiac surgeon at Emory Hospital. I have an emergency surgery right now. A 16-year-old patient is in heart failure, and she needs me in the OR immediately. I'm begging you.
Sure you are. Step back from the vehicle.
I'm not lying. Call the hospital and verify.
Call me right.
Dr. Evans Baptiste had performed over 1,200 pediatric cardiac surgeries in his 18-year career, with a success rate that made him one of the most sought-after specialists in the Southeast. But on September 11, 2024, none of that expertise mattered to Officer Brett Morrison, who saw a black man in a Lamborghini Urus and decided he must be a criminal rather than the surgeon he claimed to be. Morrison pulled Baptiste over for speeding on I-285 near the hospital exit, and then spent 48 minutes questioning every aspect of Baptiste's identity, vehicle ownership, and legal status, despite Baptiste's desperate pleas to verify his credentials with Emory University Hospital, where a 16-year-old girl with a failing heart was waiting in the OR. The officer refused to make the simple phone call that would have confirmed Baptiste's story, convinced his racist assumptions were more reliable than documentation or hospital verification. What he didn't know was that his detention would delay critical surgery beyond the safe window, that a replacement surgeon would encounter complications Baptiste would have avoided, that the permanent heart damage suffered by the patient would be directly attributed to the 48 minutes Morrison stole, and that the patient was Senator Elizabeth Hayes' daughter Hannah, whose mother would personally ensure Morrison went to prison for letting his racism override a child's chance at a healthy life. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe that saving lives should matter more than racist assumptions, then hit the like and subscribe button here on JPTV. Evans Baptiste's phone rang at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, pulling him from the brief sleep he'd managed to get after finishing evening rounds at Emory University Hospital. The number on the screen was the cardiac surgery coordinator, and calls at that hour meant only one thing: emergency surgery that couldn't wait. Dr. Baptiste, we need you in immediately. 16-year-old female, congenital heart defect with acute decompensation. She's deteriorating fast and we need to operate within the hour. Evans was already out of bed, his mind shifting into the focus mode that had made him one of the most respected pediatric cardiothoracic surgeons in the Southeast. He was 46 years old, the chief of pediatric cardiac surgery at Emory, and had dedicated his life to fixing hearts that other surgeons considered too complex or too risky. He trained at Johns Hopkins, completed his fellowship at Boston Children's Hospital, and had been recruited to Emory 8 years ago specifically to build their pediatric cardiac program into one of the nation's best. I'm 25 minutes away. Prep the OR, get the team assembled, and send me her imaging. What's the specific defect? Tetralogy of Fallot with severe pulmonary stenosis. She's been managing with medication, but she went into crisis overnight. Dr. Baptiste, the family specifically requested you. The patient's mother is Senator Elizabeth Hayes. Evans processed that information while pulling on clothes. Dark jeans, a button-down shirt, comfortable shoes he could stand in for hours during surgery. Operating on a senator's daughter meant additional pressure, but every patient deserved his best work regardless of who their parents were. Tell the senator I'm on my way. I'll be in the OR by 7:15. He grabbed his hospital credentials, his phone, and his keys, and headed to his garage where his midnight blue Lamborghini Urus sat next to his wife's more modest sedan. The Lamborghini had been a gift to himself 3 years ago after a particularly difficult year, where he'd saved the lives of twin infants that every other hospital had said were inoperable. He'd grown up poor in Atlanta, worked his way through college and medical school with scholarships and loans, and the expensive SUV was a symbol of how far he'd come and how hard he'd worked. He pulled out of his driveway in the Buckhead neighborhood at 6:52 a.m. and headed toward the hospital, which was normally a 20-minute drive but could be done in 15 if traffic cooperated. The streets were relatively empty at this early hour, and he merged onto Interstate 285, the perimeter highway that circled Atlanta, heading east toward the Clifton Road exit that would take him directly to Emory's campus. His phone buzzed with messages from his surgical team. Dr. Jennifer Pierce, his cardiac anesthesiologist, confirmed she was already at the hospital prepping. The perfusionist responsible for the heart-lung machine was running system checks. The surgical nurses were setting up the OR with the specific instruments Evans preferred for pediatric cases. Everything was coming together, but they needed him there to start. Evans accelerated to 78 miles per hour in the 60 zone, faster than he normally drove, but justified by the emergency. The highway was clear, no other cars around him, and the Clifton Road exit was visible ahead. He was making good time, would be scrubbing in by 7:12, well within the window the coordinator had given him. That's when he saw the blue lights in his rearview mirror. Officer Brett Morrison had been sitting in his usual spot on I-285 near the Ashford-Dunwoody Road exit, running radar on morning commuters and looking for violations that would justify stops. He was 39 years old, a 7-year veteran of the Georgia State Patrol, and he'd built his career on what he considered good instincts about suspicious behavior and people who deserved extra scrutiny. In Morrison's mind, those instincts had nothing to do with race and everything to do with patterns he'd observed over 7 years of traffic enforcement. But his personnel file told a different story. 11 complaints from black drivers alleging racial profiling, all describing similar experiences of being stopped for minor violations and then subjected to extended questioning about vehicle ownership, employment, and legal status that white drivers in similar situations never faced. All 11 complaints had been investigated and dismissed as unsubstantiated or within officer discretion. When Morrison's radar clocked the Lamborghini Urus at 78 and a 60, he could have let it go. It was early morning, the highway was empty, the driver was clearly in a hurry but not driving recklessly. He could have pulled the car over, written a quick ticket, and sent the driver on his way in 5 minutes. But the combination of the expensive vehicle and the black driver he could see through his windshield triggered all of Morrison's biases, and he decided this stop deserved more attention than a simple speeding ticket. He hit his lights and pulled out, accelerating to catch up with the Lamborghini. Evans saw the patrol car and felt his stomach drop because he couldn't afford delays right now, couldn't afford anything that would keep him from that OR where a 16-year-old girl's heart was failing. He pulled over to the shoulder, put the vehicle in park, and immediately started gathering his documentation. Morrison approached the driver's window with his hand near his weapon, his body cam recording everything. Evans rolled down the window and spoke before Morrison could say anything. "Officer, I'm Dr. Evans Baptiste, Chief of Pediatric Cardiac Surgery at Emory University Hospital. I'm racing to an emergency surgery right now. A 16-year-old patient is in acute heart failure and needs me in the OR immediately. I know I was speeding and I apologize, but I really need to get to the hospital." He held up his hospital credentials, his official Emory ID with his photo, his name, and his title clearly visible. Morrison took the ID and looked at it with obvious skepticism. "License and registration." Evans handed over his driver's license and the vehicle registration, both clearly showing his name and his Buckhead address. "Officer, please, I'm not exaggerating about the emergency. You can call the hospital and verify. My surgical team is waiting for me. Every minute I'm delayed increases the risk to my patient." Morrison walked back to his patrol car with the documents, and Evans watched the clock on his dashboard tick from 7:01 to 7:03 to 7:05. His phone started buzzing. The hospital calling, probably wondering where he was. He answered and heard Dr. Angela Torres, the hospital administrator on duty. "Dr. Baptiste, where are you? The patient's vitals are declining. We need you here." "I got pulled over on 285. I'm trying to get the officer to let me go, but he's checking my information. Can you call this officer and verify who I am? I gave him my hospital credentials, but he doesn't seem to believe me." "Give me the information." "I'll call right now." Evans got out of his car carefully, walking back toward Morrison's patrol car to get his badge number and information for the hospital to call. Morrison got out immediately, his hand on his weapon. "Get back in your vehicle, sir. I need your badge number so my hospital administrator can call and verify my identity. I'm a surgeon and I have a patient in crisis. Please." Morrison's eyes narrowed because in his experience, people who were this insistent about being somewhere usually had something to hide. "Get back in your vehicle now. I'll tell you when you can leave." Evans returned to the Lamborghini, his hands shaking with frustration and fear for his patient. The clock showed 7:08. He should have been parking at the hospital by now, should have been scrubbing in, should have been reviewing the imaging one last time before making his first incision. Morrison ran Baptiste's license through the system, and it came back clean. Valid license, no warrants, no violations. The vehicle registration matched the name on the license. Everything was legitimate. But Morrison's bias told him something was wrong about this picture, and he decided to investigate further. He walked back to Evans' window at 7:14, 6 minutes after the initial stop. "Sir, how did you purchase this vehicle?" Evans stared at him in disbelief. "I bought it from the Lamborghini dealership in Alpharetta 3 years ago. What does that have to do with speeding?" "This is a very expensive vehicle. I need to verify you're the legitimate owner." "You have the registration in my name. What else do you need to verify?" "Registration can be fraudulent. Are you a U.S. citizen?" Evans felt anger flash hot through his chest. "Yes, I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Atlanta. I'm a surgeon trying to get to an emergency surgery. Please, just write me the ticket and let me go." "Where's your passport or birth certificate?" "I don't carry my birth certificate to drive to work. Officer, my patient is dying. Please call the hospital. Please verify who I am. You're wasting time that could cost a child her life." But Morrison had already decided this man was lying, that the surgeon's story was too convenient, that someone with this car and this level of desperation to leave must be hiding something. And he was going to find out what it was, no matter how long it took. Morrison went back to his patrol car at 7:16 and sat there running additional checks that weren't necessary because everything had already come back clean. Evans could see him through the rear window, typing slowly on his computer, taking his time while Evans's phone buzzed constantly with calls from the hospital. He answered one and heard Dr. Jennifer Pierce, his anesthesiologist, her voice tight with stress. "Evans, where are you? Hannah's oxygen saturation is dropping. We can't wait much longer. Dr. Walsh is here and he's saying we need to start prep without you." "No, tell him to wait. I'm 10 minutes away. I just got pulled over and the officer won't let me go. Tell Angela to call the officer and verify who I am." "She's been trying. She called the number you gave her, but he's not answering his phone. Evans, the patient's mother, is asking for you. Senator Hayes is getting anxious." Evans closed his eyes, feeling helpless and furious. "Give me 5 more minutes. Please. Just 5 more minutes." At 7:22, Morrison finally walked back to the Lamborghini. Evans had now been detained for 21 minutes for a speeding violation that should have taken 5 minutes to handle. Morrison leaned down to the window with a suspicious expression. "I need to search your vehicle." "For what? I'm a surgeon going to work. I have nothing illegal in my car." "Your nervousness and your insistence on leaving quickly are making me suspicious. I think you might be transporting contraband." Evans wanted to scream. "I'm insistent because a teenager is dying, and I'm the only surgeon qualified to save her. My nervousness is because every minute you keep me here reduces her chance of survival. If you have nothing to hide, you'll consent to a search." "I don't consent. You have no probable cause. You've run my license, it's clean. You've verified the registration, it matches my name. There's no legal basis for a search. Please, just write me the speeding ticket and let me go to the hospital." Morrison's face hardened because he didn't like being told what he could and couldn't do. "Step out of the vehicle." Evans got out, his surgical scrubs visible under his shirt now that he was standing. Morrison saw them but still didn't believe the surgeon's story. He walked around the Lamborghini, looking through the windows at the interior, searching for anything that would justify his suspicion. "What's in the back cargo area?" "My gym bag and my medical journals." "Officer, please, I'm begging you. Call the hospital. The number's on my hospital ID badge. Just call and verify." Morrison ignored the request and opened the rear hatch without permission, going through Evans's gym bag and flipping through medical textbooks like they might contain hidden drugs. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. At 7:31, 30 minutes into the stop, Evans's phone rang again. It was Dr. Stephen Walsh, the hospital's other cardiothoracic surgeon, competent but not specialized in pediatrics. "Evans, I'm sorry. We can't wait anymore. Hannah's in heart failure and we're losing her. I'm starting the procedure. Get here as soon as you can, and you can take over when you arrive. Evans felt his world collapse. Stephen, please, just give me 10 more minutes. We don't have 10 more minutes. I'm scrubbing in now. I'll do my best. The call ended, and Evans stood on the highway shoulder watching Morrison continue his pointless search of an empty vehicle while at Emory University Hospital. A less experienced surgeon was being forced to start a complex pediatric cardiac surgery that Evans should have been performing. At 7:38, Morrison finally decided he'd found nothing and walked back to Evans. I'm writing you a citation for speeding and for failure to provide proof of citizenship. Failure to provide proof of citizenship? I gave you my driver's license. That's proof I'm a legal resident. Driver's licenses can be obtained fraudulently. You should carry additional documentation. Morrison took another 8 minutes to write the citations, standing by his patrol car and filling out the forms with deliberate slowness, while Evans stood by the Lamborghini watching his career and a patient's life slip away because of racism disguised as police work. At 7:46, 45 minutes after the initial stop, Morrison handed Evans the citations and walked back to his patrol car without another word. Evans jumped into the Lamborghini and raced toward the hospital, knowing he was too late, knowing the surgery had already started without him, knowing that a girl's heart was being operated on by hands less experienced than his, because an officer couldn't see past his skin color. He pulled into the hospital parking garage at 7:53, a full hour and 6 minutes after he should have arrived. He ran through the hallway still in his street clothes, burst through the surgical suite doors, and found the OR where Hannah Hayes was on the table, with her chest open and Dr. Walsh working on her heart. Walsh looked up, relief and stress mixed on his face. Evans, thank God. I've run into complications. The pulmonary valve is worse than the imaging showed, and I can't get clean margins. Evans scrubbed faster than he'd ever scrubbed in his life, got into his surgical gown and gloves, and stepped up to the table to see the damage. What he saw made his blood run cold, because these were complications he would have anticipated and prepared for, problems he would have solved in the first 20 minutes of surgery. But Walsh had been struggling with them for the past 15 minutes and had made decisions that couldn't be undone. Hannah's heart was savable, but the delay before surgery and the complications Walsh had encountered meant permanent damage that Evans would have prevented if he'd been there from the start. And all of it happened because Brett Morrison spent 48 minutes proving that his racist assumptions mattered more than a child's life. Evans took over the surgery and worked for 4 hours to repair what could be repaired, but the damage from the delay and Walsh's complications was permanent. Hannah's pulmonary valve couldn't be reconstructed the way Evans had planned because tissue that should have been pristine was now compromised. The repair he completed would function, but not optimally, meaning Hannah would need additional surgeries throughout her life and would never have the full cardiac capacity she should have had. When he finally closed and stepped away from the table at 12:17 p.m., Evans pulled off his surgical mask and had to steady himself against the wall because the weight of what had happened was crushing. Dr. Walsh approached him with guilt written across his face. I'm sorry, Evans. I know if you'd been here from the start, this outcome would have been different. I did everything I could, but pediatric cases aren't my specialty, and I was in over my head. Evans couldn't blame Walsh because none of this was his fault. You saved her life. That's what matters. But she's going to live with limitations she shouldn't have. Senator Elizabeth Hayes was waiting in the surgical consultation room, and when Evans walked in still wearing his scrubs with Hannah's blood on them, she stood up immediately. She was a tall woman in her early 50s, a two-term senator known for her work on healthcare policy and criminal justice reform. And the fear in her eyes was the same fear every parent had when their child's life hung in the balance. Dr. Baptiste, how is she? Evans sat down heavily and told her the truth because she deserved nothing less. Hannah survived the surgery and her heart is functioning. But I need to be direct with you about the complications we encountered and the long-term implications. He explained the delays, the tissue damage, the suboptimal repair, and the fact that Hannah would need monitoring and likely additional surgeries as she grew. Hayes listened with her hands gripped together, her face getting harder with each detail. You're telling me my daughter will have permanent limitations because of complications during surgery? Yes. And Senator, I need to tell you why those complications happened. Evans pulled out his phone and showed her the timestamps. I was called for emergency surgery at 6:47 a.m. I left my house at 6:52. I should have arrived at the hospital by 7:12 at the latest. I was pulled over for speeding at 7 a.m. by a Georgia State Patrol officer named Brett Morrison. He detained me for 48 minutes. Hayes' expression shifted from grief to cold fury. 48 minutes for a speeding stop? He didn't believe I was a surgeon. He questioned my citizenship, demanded proof of vehicle ownership beyond registration, searched my car without cause, and refused to call the hospital to verify my credentials, even though I begged him repeatedly. My surgical team called him directly and he didn't answer. By the time he let me go, Dr. Walsh had already started the surgery because Hannah couldn't wait any longer. Evans pulled up the citations Morrison had written. He gave me a ticket for speeding and for failure to provide proof of citizenship, even though I'm a natural-born U.S. citizen and my driver's license proves it. Senator, if I'd been here at 7:12 like I should have been, I would have started surgery before the crisis point. I would have anticipated the complications Dr. Walsh encountered. Your daughter would have had a complete repair instead of a compromised one. Hayes took Evans' phone and looked at the citations, her hands shaking. This officer detained you for 48 minutes during a medical emergency, and that delay directly caused permanent damage to my daughter's heart. Yes, ma'am, and I believe he detained me because he saw a black man in an expensive car and decided I must be lying about being a surgeon, regardless of the credentials I showed him, or the hospital trying to verify my identity. Hayes stood up and made a phone call, her voice ice cold with controlled rage. This is Senator Hayes. I need you to pull the body cam footage and complete traffic stop records for Georgia State Patrol Officer Brett Morrison, badge number 4739, from a stop conducted this morning on I-285 at approximately 7 a.m. I need it within the hour. This is priority 1. She ended the call and looked at Evans. My daughter has permanent heart damage because an officer racially profiled you and refused to believe you were exactly who you said you were. I chair the Senate Committee on Law Enforcement Accountability, Dr. Baptiste. This officer's career is over, and I'm going to make sure what happened to Hannah becomes the reason we pass federal legislation about detaining medical professionals during emergencies. The body cam footage arrived within 90 minutes, and what it showed was undeniable. Evans calmly explaining the emergency, showing his credentials, begging Morrison to call the hospital. Morrison dismissing everything, asking about citizenship and vehicle ownership, taking 48 minutes to process a simple speeding stop, while Evans's phone buzzed with increasingly desperate calls from the surgical team. The audio captured Evans saying, "A 16-year-old is dying," and Morrison responding, "That's not my problem." Senator Hayes watched the footage once, then watched it again, and her face showed the transformation from grieving mother to the prosecutor she'd been before entering politics. Morrison had delayed her daughter's surgeon based on racial profiling, and his actions had directly caused Hannah permanent harm. This wasn't just a civil rights violation anymore. This was immeasurable damage to a child that could be traced directly to 48 minutes of racist detention. And Hayes had both the evidence and the power to ensure Morrison faced consequences that went far beyond losing his job. Brett Morrison was arrested 6 days after the traffic stop, charged with official misconduct, reckless endangerment, and deprivation of civil rights. The criminal case moved faster than most because Senator Hayes used every bit of her influence to ensure it was prioritized, and because the evidence was so overwhelming that Morrison's defense attorney advised him to take a plea deal. He refused, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, that he was just being thorough during a routine traffic stop. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented the body cam footage showing Morrison's 48-minute detention of a surgeon racing to emergency surgery. They presented phone records showing the hospital called Morrison's cell phone 4 times trying to verify Evans's identity, and Morrison never answered. They brought in Dr. Walsh, who testified that the complications he encountered were preventable if Evans had been there from the start. Medical experts explained how the 48-minute delay had directly caused the tissue damage that led to Hannah's permanent heart condition. Then Hannah herself testified A 16-year-old girl who had to explain that she couldn't play soccer anymore, couldn't run without getting winded, would need additional surgeries throughout her life, all because an officer didn't believe a black surgeon could own a Lamborghini. Her testimony broke the jury. Morrison was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 4 years in prison with permanent loss of his law enforcement certification. But the criminal conviction was only the beginning. The civil lawsuit Evans filed resulted in a $3.8 million settlement from the state of Georgia. Senator Hayes' lawsuit on behalf of Hannah was larger, $8.2 million, with the majority designated for Hannah's future medical expenses. But Hayes didn't stop at settlements. She introduced federal legislation called the Medical Professional Protection Act, requiring law enforcement to verify medical emergency claims immediately and imposing criminal penalties for officers who delayed medical personnel during life-threatening situations. The Georgia State Patrol was forced to implement sweeping reforms after an investigation revealed Morrison's pattern of targeting black drivers had been documented in complaints for 7 years, but never addressed. His supervisor, who dismissed those complaints, was fired. The department created an early warning system to flag officers who showed statistical disparities in who they stopped and how long they detained people of different races. But all the reforms and settlements couldn't restore what was lost. Hannah Hayes underwent 2 additional surgeries over the next 18 months to address complications from her compromised repair. She developed anxiety about medical procedures and depression about the physical limitations she'd carry for life. The athletic and active teenager who'd played 3 sports became someone who had to carefully monitor her heart rate and accept that certain activities would always be beyond her capacity. Evans carried his own burden. He'd never had a surgical outcome compromised by factors outside his control, had never lost the chance to give a patient his best work because someone detained him based on racial bias. He developed anxiety about driving to emergency calls, started leaving for the hospital earlier than necessary, bought a dash cam for his car, and carried multiple forms of identification, including his passport, just in case he was ever stopped again. The joy he'd felt in his Lamborghini was gone, replaced by awareness that it made him a target. The traffic stop on September 11 lasted 48 minutes, but its consequences rippled across years. Morrison went to prison, policies changed, laws were passed. Evans and the Hayes family received millions in settlements, but Hannah still had a compromised heart that would require lifetime monitoring and multiple surgeries. Evans still felt the trauma of being detained while a patient suffered. Senator Hayes still lived with the knowledge that her daughter's permanent condition was caused by an officer who saw her surgeon's skin color and decided his racist assumptions mattered more than a medical emergency. The accountability was real and unprecedented. Morrison's conviction became a landmark case taught in law enforcement academies about the consequences of racial profiling. The legislation Senator Hayes passed protected countless medical professionals from similar delays. The reforms implemented by Georgia State Patrol created better oversight of officers who showed patterns of bias. But on the days when Hannah struggled to catch her breath after climbing stairs, when she had to sit out while friends played sports, when she faced another surgery to address complications that shouldn't exist, the victory felt hollow. Justice was served and systems changed, but a 16-year-old girl would live her entire life with a heart that didn't work the way it should have, because 48 minutes of racism had stolen her chance at a complete repair. Evans continued his career and saved countless other lives, but he never forgot the patient he couldn't save properly, because an officer's bias mattered more than his credentials. The settlement money sat in accounts funding Hannah's medical care and Evans's charitable foundation for underserved cardiac patients. But no amount of money could buy back the 48 minutes that changed everything. 48 minutes. That's all it took for racism to cause permanent damage to a child's heart. Share this if you believe credentials and expertise should matter more than skin color. Subscribe to JPTV for stories where justice was served, but victims paid prices that can never be repaid. Drop a comment. How do we stop officers from letting bias override emergencies? We'll see you in the next story.
Every historical record holds a profound story waiting to be carefully uncovered. Every story we explore is a deliberate step closer to the ultimate truth. Thank you for joining us on this vital journey of discovery today.